are forgiven, etc. By these words, the faith of penitence is aroused for obtaining the forgiveness of sins. But in all their writing, teaching, and preaching, their sole concern has not been not to teach what is promised to Christians in these words, or what they ought to believe, and what great consolation they might find in them, but only through force and violence to extend their own tyranny far, wide, and deep. It has finally come to pass, to such a pass, that some of them have begun to command the very angels in heaven and to boast in incredible mad wickedness, that in these words they have obtained the right to rule in heaven and earth, and possess the power to bind even in heaven. Thus they say nothing of faith, which is the salvation of the people, but babble only of the despotic power of pontiffs, whereas Christ says nothing at all of power, but speaks only of faith. The penitents received no consolation. The sacraments were abused to extend tyranny. The authority of the word was misused so as not to grant faith to those who heard it, but to extend the power of those who spoke. The care of souls went wanting. Well, my thesis here makes the claim that the exercise of power in the church is the abuse of our need for consolation. Consequently, consolation, rightly done, displays the proper use of authority for the care of souls. So we're going to look at consolation and its driving force. God has placed in us the need for consolation. Surrounded by the losses arising out of a creation broken and chaotic in sin, we constantly require healing from them. Grief is the God-given process by which we heal and recover from our losses. Consolation is the means by which we help, assist, and sustain one another in our grieving, comfort one another in our afflictions, and hold one another together in our brokenness. Broadly speaking, and there are differing opinions on this, grief has several non-linear stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The chief of our losses is death. So that these stages of grief can also be said to be the stages of dying. Rightly consoled, these stages serve beneficial functions. Denial, a temporary defense. Denial serves to buy the grief-stricken time. Time to build, to receive, to obtain in some fashion the internal strength they've not needed to use before. Time for the marshaling of resources, physical, emotional, and spiritual, needed to face the loss. And time to find the support of others that they need to cope with the destruction caused by the loss. The acceptable cannot be accepted until the supports are found to cope with it. When the supports come into place, denial fades and anger begins. The bereaved person's anger can be directed at themselves, at others around them, at the one who has died or the cause of the loss, even at God. And if we hold to the necessity of God in all situations, then God is necessarily behind all losses. Anger's beneficial function comes from the grieving person's confrontation with his or her internal concept of justice. A concept that has been disrupted by the loss. That sense of justice cannot be provided to them. The confrontation must be endured and resolved. The bargaining stage involves the hope, a false one, that the loss or the death can be avoided, postponed, delayed. Most often this negotiation takes place with the perceived cause of the loss or the death. In many cases, again, God. Bargaining and anger, the injustice of it all. Sometimes these two work in tandem as the bargaining process exposes the true cost of both the loss and the consolation. Depression sets in as the true cost of both loss and its accompanying consolation become apparent. Depression permits the bereaved person to re-examine his or her own personal competence and his or her own personal value. In depression, a person is given permission, both internally and externally, to say, I'm incompetent, incapable, worthless, and weak. Depression allows the bereaved or dying person to disconnect from the attachments of love, affection, and capability, acknowledging his or her inability to fix or resolve the situation. Finally, there is a bottoming out, a point of transition when, as if through a door, the depression is transformed into acceptance. Acceptance is the healed state, which through time becomes less and less transient. Peace and understanding persist with greater frequency. And since these are non-linear stages, there will be loops, skips, and repeats in abundance as the healing process continues from the loss and death, as healing is wrought through the normal grieving process. The impetus, the urgency that drives us through this healing is brought by another human reality, the denial of death. The denial of death subverts the grieving process, drives it in such a way that grief stages, by being wrongly consoled, become not stages of healing, but occasions for oppression and the exercise of tyranny. Developed through his lifetime of work, Ernest Becker proposed a unifying theory of human behavior, the denial of death, or more formally put, generative death anxiety. Becker's thesis can be summed up like this. The most basic anxiety is